And then, okay, yeah, no, we're live. It always, I don't know why I get surprised every time. Anyway, hello everyone, and welcome to Shop Talk, Marginalized Creators on Craft. My name is Aaron Aceves, and my pronouns are he, him. I'm the author of This Is Why They Hate Us, a young adult novel coming March 29th, 2022, from Simon & Schuster Books for Young Readers. This Is Why They Hate Us is the story of 17-year-old Enrique Luna, who tries to use the summer after his junior year to get over his feelings for his best friend Salim. I am your moderator tonight, and I am talking with the amazing and talented Isaac Fitzsimons and Kyle Lukoff. Isaac Fitzsimons, he, him, is the author of the Passing Playbook from Dial Books for Young Readers and Penguin Random House. He writes young adult fiction so that every reader can see themselves reflected in literature. A lifetime dabbler in the arts, he currently lives outside Washington, D.C., and does research for an arts advocacy nonprofit in the city. Kyle Lukoff is the author of the middle grade novel Too Bright to See, the Stonewall Award-winning picture book When Aiden Became a Brother, Explosion at the Poem Factory, and many more. While becoming a writer, he worked as a bookseller for 10 years and then 9 more years as a school librarian. He lives in the city, aka New York City, and hopes you're having a nice day. That's such a sweet little tag in the bio. Hi guys, how are you doing?
Good. Hi, Aaron.
Alrighty, so for those of you who are not in the green room, which is literally everyone who's listening to this besides Isaac and Kyle, I usually have a drink with me, an alcoholic beverage, but instead today I'm having a root beer float, because why not? So first what we gotta do is have you guys pitch your books. So let's start with Kyle.
Sure. So I kind of wrote myself into a corner with this one. It's a little bit hard to talk about. So I will actually just read to you from the author's note, because then I don't have to come up with something on the fly. So the author's note at the back of Too Bright to See starts off saying, with some imaginary dialogue, your friend. Ooh, that book looks good. What's it about? You, maybe. It's a ghost story. It's about a kid named Bug, her uncle, their uncle, if you're having a hard time figuring out how to talk about this book, that's okay. I'm not always sure how to talk about it either. And then I'm going to skip some parts because there's actually spoilers. But basically, I say, when people ask what my book is about, I say, it's about a kid being haunted by the ghost of their dead uncle and figuring out something important.
Yeah, perfect. I'm glad I usually read author's notes before I read the actual book, because I have to I don't have to read everything before and after and then just read the pure book. It's this weird thing that I do. But I didn't read the author's notes for some weird reason. It's like I had a gay uncle who died who was telling me not to read the author's note because I don't like spoilers. But perfect. And Isaac?
Sure. So the passing playbook is, I messed it up too. We both did it, except I did the second word instead of the first one. The passing playbook is about Spencer, who starts at a new school where nobody knows that he's trans, and he joins the soccer team, and everything is going great until he gets benched because his birth certificate still says female, and he has to decide whether to come out and fight the ruling or stay stealth. But coming out would mean coming out to everyone, including the team that he's fallen for, and staying stealth would mean he'd have to spend the rest of the season on the bench.
Awesome. So the first crafts question I have for you guys is actually, well, it's interesting, like whenever I'm reading books for Shop Talk, like from the different authors, the way that they kind of speak to each other a little bit. And what's interesting is that I know in my experience, like reading YA, it's usually first person present tense, like that's sort of the predominant mode. But with passing playbook, you have third past. And then Kyle, I don't read as many middle grade books, but I did sort of, from what I remember, they were usually in third and told in past. But Too Bright to See is actually first present. And so I'm wondering if you guys can talk about both, obviously the point of view, the person, and then also the tense, and like what brought you to use those specific ones. And whoever has their answer ready to go can fire.
I can go, actually, because I've been thinking about this I obviously think about it a lot because I wrote the thing. But I got a very good review of my book in the New York Times by Patrick Ness, where the only slightly critical thing he said is that he wished that it hadn't been in first present because apparently it litters books for young readers, which I find somewhat true. Like I often sort of stop and realize that it's first present and that I don't like the book as much. And I actually I agree with him to some extent, but I chose first present for To Write to See very much on purpose. And I wish I had known you were going to ask this, because then I would have gone into my living room and grabbed my copy of On Writing by Samuel Delaney, where he talks about this. But he describes first present as something along the lines of looking through the slats of like Venetian blinds. Like you can only see this much. It's a very limiting and constricting point of view in a lot of ways. And this book is about an experience that feels limiting, an experience that feels constricting, and an experience that feels like you can't see everything around you. And I thought that first person present was the best way to get that feeling of claustrophobia across without saying it in so many words. So I don't actually like first present, but it is the best one for this book.
Now I wish I had gone first, because that's such a great answer. And I don't know if I have such a good one. So when I first started drafting the book, it was actually a dual point of view, and it was written in first person. And I believe it was first person present. But the way that I write my first drafts, it's very kind of, I just kind of like blurt everything out, and it's not well written at all. I think that's how a lot of writers work. It's just like really bad, just kind of get out the story on the page. And so I was having a really hard time when I was revising it in first person. And I just kind of made the switch to third when I decided to cut, it was Justice's POV. I decided to cut his POV and just focus on Spencer. And then doing that allowed me to kind of step back and go into the third. Something my editor said was that, and before I signed with the editor, one of the questions was, were they going to make me switch to first person, because that is generally seen in YA? And my editor said no. But one thing she did say that what she really liked about the third person was that you get to see the repetition of he and him and his and the pronouns more than you'd see if it was first person, which with a trans character, it's kind of affirming. And I didn't actually do that on purpose, but it's something that I think had the effect. And then something else that I've heard about the book is that it kind of has, the third person allows it to have more of a not exactly fairy tale, but less of a, I feel like it's a bit of a different type of, your air conditioning went off and now it's very quiet. I can hear myself talk. I like the air conditioning.
Actually,
it was like white noise and soothing.
Yeah, actually, I'm gonna turn that off while my mic is off. But you keep talking. I can hear you.
Okay, and so it has kind of like a fairy tale quality to it, where it's like more of a story. Because as a writer, my strength, I don't think my strength is in like really beautiful prose, but I think I can tell a good story. And the third person kind of allows that sort of narration for me. So that's why I picked third person.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's funny. I know there's always a pressure to sort of, align with whatever's popular in the age category or the genre or whatever. But I think for both of you, it fit, again, like you guys were saying, it fit the story you were trying to tell. And then also the thing is, when people are like, I have a version of it where either they went from one point of view to two, or they go from 2 to 1, or they go from 3 to 2. I'm always like, can I read the original? I want to know what Justin was doing. I want to know his voice that you had for him. Because did I say Justin? It's Justin. Right?
Justice, yeah.
Yeah. I feel like they kind of it's one of those names where it sounds exactly the same. I want to know that I am saying the right name, which is Justice, and that is a point in the book, his name. And it's something we're going to talk about a little later. We're glad to hear you guys talk about that. So next, let's talk about, Kyle, you were talking about how hard it is to describe sort of the premise of your book. Isaac, yours is a little more straightforward, but there is, a definite sort of plot structure to it. And so I was wondering what came first in terms of character versus plot. If, you sort of had these plots in mind and you're like, who's the perfect protagonist for this? Or if you sort of saw this person and it was like, what happens to them? Oh, gay uncle dies and paranormal activity. Isaac, why don't you go first?
For me, it was very much plot. And like I can pinpoint where I got the idea of the book. I was listening to a radio program where people share a story about songs, and a guy came on and he shared the story about Elvis Presley's "Can't Help Falling in Love," and he said that he was at a military academy when he was a teenager, and an older boy taught him how to play that song on guitar, and then he ended up playing that song for his wife on their first date before obviously they were married. And I listened to the story and I just thought it was really beautiful. And it was kind of that image of a boy teaching another boy how to play a love song on a guitar in an environment like a military academy. And I kind of took that and made it into a soccer team. And that's really where the idea for the story came from. I knew I needed characters who could fit that, and the characters came second. But I was really writing to that scene of a boy teaching another boy how to play a love song on guitar.
I think I read an interview. Kyle's emotional. I think I read an interview where you talk about that, Isaac, and I was like, okay, I love that, but how did he get to soccer? You just explained it, and I'm like, okay, military, similar to soccer camp. That makes sense. And Kyle?
So I'm going to try, sorry. I'm going to try to avoid saying exactly what happens, but in this book, because spoilers or whatever, but also like if you have any idea, not to be like, don't you know who I am, but if you have any larger conception of the work that I try to do, I feel like what I am talking around will not be a surprise when you're reading this book, so I'm just going to do my best. So the idea for this book it sort of unrolled in my head all at once. One morning, I was in the library that I used to work at, talking to a parent at the school that I used to work at who also writes kids' books. And I was telling her that I wanted to do two different things, because I want to create an object more than I want to tell a specific story. Like, I want to do a book that does this thing rather than I want to tell a story because I'm a storyteller. And I said I want to write a middle grade novel about a trans boy, because at the time I did not know of any that I liked. And then I also wanted to write a middle grade novel where I took this first sentence that my dad had used in a story that he wrote when he was much younger, that he didn't save a copy of, he had no memory of it, he didn't remember anything except the first sentence. And as a kid, he said that first sentence was, "It was strange living in the old house now that Uncle Roderick was dead." And that sentence just stuck in my brain for my whole life. And when I started writing, I was like, I want to do that. It's a good sentence. I wonder what I could do with this sentence. So I was telling this mom that I was like, I want to create these two separate objects, but I'm lazy and I also don't know which one to do first. And then I was like, oh, duh, I'm just going to do the both at the one time. I'm just going to do one book instead of two books. I know I have many more books, but that's a different story. And when I had that sudden realization, it was like, I'm not going to say that the entire story sort of like unfurled itself in my brain at that one moment, but every specific important moment came to me all at the same time. Like, I knew the beginning, I knew the ending, and I had the vaguest sense of how it got from here to there. And then it just took me 4 years and many, many moments of giving up on it entirely to just write it down.
Finally, just a concrete craft tip: steal from your father. It's something we can all do.
I mean, the craft tip that one could take from that is to listen and to remember.
Yeah, I mean, that is a great takeaway. But also steal from your dad. We have a reminder in the chat. If you have any questions, be sure to put them in the Ask a Question function. We already have one, which is great. I'm going to take a look. I do try to sort of have a bit of a flow. It's not always that it's not like super elaborate or anything, but I will try and work in the questions. Yeah, so writing ritual will probably come at the end, but thank you for asking questions, and please keep doing that. Alrighty, next I want to talk about names, nicknames. Not just like sort of what's the significance of names and nicknames in your book, but also like, how did you choose the particular names in your books, right? Like, where the inspiration came from. And it's interesting in Passing Playbook. In sports, there's kind of like, not that I know, but I'm gonna pretend from what I've seen. I like in sports usually there is that culture, right, of like giving people nicknames and referring to people by their last names only and like that sort of thing. And I always feel like that's like nicknames and calling people by their last names is just so fruitful, especially in YA for like showing relationships and stuff. But then I also, think about um, like how do you choose that specific last name? Did it come from like your friend, or did it come from, maybe you read an article? And then Kyle with, I mean, you have a standout protagonist name, which is Bug, with a G, and it's in the book it's yeah, I think throughout it's a term of endearment, and so but it's like sort of one of those weird ones where you're like, did your parent just call you what I think? So if you guys want to talk about that.
Should I go first since you went first last time?
Go ahead.
Okay. One thing that I sort of realized after it was too late is that nobody in this book has a last name. And I wish I could tell you why, but it's because nobody has a reason to have a last name, because like Bug is just kind of alone, and like Bug's family knows what their last name is, and Bug's friend Moira knows what her last name is. And like we don't go around being like, I mean, we do because we're authors and it's our job to say our last names all the time. But like, when I worked in elementary school, like I don't think the children knew each other's last names. Like they don't use them ever really. So I just didn't think to include it. But now sometimes like, what is their last name? I don't know. I chose Moira's name long before I ever watched Schitt's Creek. So she's not named after Moira Rose, in case anyone was wondering that. And there's a moment early on, so she had been going by the name Mo, and then asked to change to the word Moira, which is thematic in a lot of different ways for the story, because I think that childhood and adolescence is always a time of transformation and transition for pretty much every human being, and that different people need different kinds of support as they go through that process. Other names I just kind of took, like one mom is named after the mom at my school that I was talking to this book about. The other mom is named after the other mom at my school that I hung out with a lot. I tend to take names from kids that I worked with, or I ask them how they would want to be named if they were to be in a book. The librarian her last name is a mixture of my two librarian friends, Silverman and Goldstein, so her last name is Goldman. And then Bug, because I wanted a cute nickname that wasn't necessarily attached to any particular gender. And because I like bugs. Although originally Bug's nickname had been Fly, like Fly. And I don't know why I did that. But I remember going through a draft and be like, oh, because like I was like calling Bug that name throughout, and then at some point someone called Bug Fly, and I was like, oh no, that's a terrible idea. Why did I do that?
Yeah, I much prefer Bug to Fly. And Isaac?
So I actually, when I'm writing, I usually just kind of grab like a random name and put it in, and sometimes it's the same name and it stays, and sometimes it changes. I use a lot of my old teachers' names. So like Coach Schilling was named after my history professor in college. His last name was Schilling. With Justice's family, it was a lot of fun to think of names for him and his siblings. Justice, I mean, honestly, the first time I heard the name Justice was Dance Moms. There's the reality TV show Dance Moms. There was a kid, a boy dancer named Justice, and I was like, okay, that's an interesting name. I'll file it in my name drawer. But then I just wanted other sort of names similar to that for his siblings. And he actually had twin brothers named Dust and Ashes, but they got cut, unfortunately. His older sister who's also not mentioned in the book. She kind of got cut, but she's still there in my mind. Her name is Chastity. And I loved like watching Teen Moms, where like the teen's mom was named Chastity, because that was just kind of funny to me. So her name is Chastity. He has a little sister named Piety, and then another little brother named Steadfast. And I just loved what names could be used as names that are kind of those type of like values. For Spencer, I kind of I think for, like with trans people, the way that we name ourselves can be kind of like interesting sometimes, because sometimes you'll choose a name that is common for boys being born like now. So you get the same name as a newborn, or you'll go back to one of like the names that a lot of trans guys use, which is really stereotypical, but like the Aiden, Jaden, Braden's, like when Aiden became a brother.
I
And
did
then
that on purpose.
I have an Aiden in my book as well, but it got kind of a nod. And then, but also like what your parents might have named you if you were born in the gender you identify, and then just kind of like random like old school names. And I kind of chose Spencer because of that. Like I wanted a name that wasn't that way. I think Spencer's getting more common, but at the time I was writing, it wasn't like a top name, but it was kind of an older fashioned name that wasn't around as much. And it's also based, going back to the story of how I got the idea for the book, he's named after his dad's roommate. And it was kind of linked to the roommate teaching the other boy how to play the song of guitar. So it all kind of came full circle in that sense. But I really love thinking up names. In my current book, I needed a name for a radio presenter, so I just took 2 radio presenters I like and smushed them together. Then I did a name for another radio presenter who I didn't like. He had to be bad, and I took Piers Morgan and what's her face, Katie Hopkins. They're both British media personalities who are terrible, and I just smushed their names together. And like, if you're in my book and you're a bad character and you recognize your name, like there's a reason for that. There was a teacher that I took like half her name and put her in a book for a teacher I didn't like, but I think that teacher got cut. So I really do put people that I know in my books. I have a Jenkins because I have 2 friends whose last name is Jenkins. I think that might be it though. But I take a lot of real life inspiration for my names.
Awesome. The first thing I did when I found out Justice and his siblings all have like a themed name because they have religious parents, the first thing I thought about was 30 Rock, where there's an episode where a character is playing, she's in a really bad movie and she's playing a lawyer and her name is Constance Justice. And it's like that kind of like over the top sort of like just on the nose thing. And I was like, that's so accurate for like, you know, I grew up around Christians and I like that whole like just pushing it so hard and wanting like your kid to be like this saint. I'm like, oh, that was hilarious.
I'm also obsessed with the names Dust and Ashes. Like,
I'm so sad they got cut.
Oh yeah, okay, cool. Sorry, I should have looked at this. I mean, these are my questions. I didn't take them from someone else. But anyway, let's talk about setting. So we can talk specifically about where your books take place. Isaac, yours takes place in Ohio, and Kyle, yours in Vermont. So I like to hear about sort of like if you're familiar with the area, and like if you based the image of everything we're seeing on somewhere you know. And then I would also like to talk, if it leads there in your mind, about sort of the thematic implications of that as well, and not just in a woods, scary, like that sort of thing, but more about like as queer people, and that's the only identity thing I'll say today. But sort of the place of a city versus a suburb versus nature, because in Kyle, your book it's pretty much all about sort of nature and this house that's sort of isolated and yeah. So tell me about location.
So my book's set in Ohio, and it is set in a real town, a fictionalized version of a real town called Apple Creek. And so I went to college in Ohio, and Apple Creek is like a town nearby that I did my student teaching in. So I spent some time there, and I wanted to set it in that type of environment because there's a real mixture of people. So it's in Wayne County, which is one of the largest Amish populations in the world. And so like when I'd be teaching, like there would be kids who were actually Amish in the classrooms and in the school. But then there's also the college in the town nearby. So that brings in kids internationally and nationally and professors. And it's more progressive than the surrounding area, which is very conservative. And so because my story deals with politics that deal with identity that are often debated when they really shouldn't be, but they are. And there is kind of a divide between sides. Having it set in a place that has such a mixture of people kind of made sense to me. And I wanted to have that liberal school, the school that Spencer goes to, the little private school there as well. Just because like things are more complicated. Like even when you're in a really like red area, it doesn't mean that everyone in that area has the same political identity. So that's kind of why I chose to set it in Ohio. I was familiar with the place. I liked the politics. I looked up like the laws for athletes, which have now changed. By the time I was writing it, it was accurate. And there are like the ice cream place. I won't go into too many spoilers, but I based the ice cream place on a real place that's there. I kind of just threw in some names of real stores and restaurants into the book as well to kind of set it there. But it is very much fictionalized. Like I don't know about the geography. I wasn't looking at a map when I was writing the book. So things are probably much farther apart. And because my characters can't drive, I just gave them bikes, and like they're gonna bike around lots of places, and hopefully it makes sense. But being in a rural area, I think it's easier to have that as well.
So for To Write to See, I knew that it had to be in a remote part of the country where it would make sense to have a giant haunted house that had nothing nearby. And at first I thought maybe upstate New York, which is not where I'm from, but I'm in New York City, so I don't know, it seemed just like up from here. I actually grew up in the Pacific Northwest, like about 20 miles north of Seattle, near like, it was like a Walmart and a McDonald's and a Blockbuster and all those things, so not at all like the scene I'm describing. And I ended up choosing Vermont because someone that I used to be very good friends with, and I'm no longer friends with, which is very hard, and I don't want to talk about that part. But someone that I used to be extremely close with is from basically where I described in Vermont, from a very specific tiny town. And you know, they would always tell me about their childhood and their house and like what it was like to just be surrounded by trees on top of a mountain and to really only have your family around. And it just seems so fascinating to me and so different from what I was used to. And so I decided to specifically set it in Vermont based on my friends' descriptions growing up there. And then when I went to visit, I was able to sort of flesh it out and like visualize it in my mind a little bit better. But the reason why I specifically needed a sort of removed place is because I wanted the book is very close to my sort of internal emotional sense of self. Like the plot of the book has nothing to do with my life, but Bug's internal emotional landscape is very much mine. But as a kid, I had kids nearby. I had a bike that I never rode, and there were kids whose like doorbells I rang to see if they wanted to play that day. And like if I wasn't hanging out with someone that day, it was because I couldn't find anyone to hang out with, not because I didn't have a choice in the matter. And I remember as a kid being like, man, I wish that there was nobody around so I didn't have to feel bad for not having friends. Like I didn't have friends. I had a hard time making friends, and I wanted to just not even have the choice. So I wanted to recreate that experience for my fictional protagonist as one that I didn't have for myself. Sort of this feeling of like leaning into isolation and leaning into loneliness instead of feeling like you're required to play with the neighborhood kids even if you don't like them very much. I was not a very pleasant child, to be clear. Like the reason why I had a hard time making friends was as much me as it was anybody else. And also a lot of people identify as having been my friends. I just didn't necessarily recognize that at the time. So yeah, I've had people ask me if I have a connection to Vermont, and it doesn't feel great to say no. Like I don't feel like it's an own voices issue. Like I don't feel like I'm exploiting the identities of Vermonters by not identifying as a Vermonter. That doesn't feel like a marginalization that I need to be mindful of, but I also did want to get it right, and I did want to be like familiar with the ways that people from there talk about their state. But also, to be clear, like Bug's family are not native Vermonters. Like Bug's family moved there from New York City, so they are also outsiders to some degree. So if anyone was like, oh, like if you were really from Vermont, you wouldn't think that way. Well, they're not really. So that's sort of my cop out in that regard. Although if anyone who lives in Vermont wants to tell me about a real mistake that I did make, you should tell me, because I love knowing about mistakes I made so I don't make them again.
Well, so you said you were a difficult child. There's a scene in the book where there's an argument about tomatoes and whether they're a vegetable or a fruit, and the main character says it's a fruit because of the seeds, and which is right, but the other person says Moira. It's young Moira, when she was Mo, says, but they're grown in the vegetable garden. And then the main character pushes her. Is that based on real life?
That was literally just me and that kid that I had to be friends with because our moms worked together. I sometimes wonder if April's ever going to read this book. I don't think she will, but if she ever reads it, she'll be like, "Oh, Kyle, you just did that to me." It's not. I don't know, but like tomatoes are fruits, and it's important to recognize that. And just because something is grown in a vegetable garden does not make it a vegetable. There's no such thing as vegetables. Anyway, that aside, yes, that conflict I took from my real life. I do not think that I pushed her in that moment. I believe at some point I recall slapping her. I was like 9 years old. Please don't get mad at me for being. I had a lot of feelings. I wasn't good at them. I haven't hit anyone as an adult. I just admitted that in person. Anyway, I didn't have a lot of friends for good reason. But yeah, so the relationship between Bug and Moya was literally just my relationship with the girl that I had to hang out with because our moms worked together. And when I was writing this book, when I got started drafting it, I was like, oh, I'm just going to sort of like recreate this relationship because it's interesting to add these conflicts here. And then I finished the thing and I kind of forgot about April because like I haven't seen her in, 25 years. And then my mom read it and she called me. She's like, oh yeah, like that was just you hanging out with April. And I was like, right, that was, yes, correct. I forgot that was real, but it was real. But literally, yeah, she was like, we grow tomatoes in our vegetable garden. Therefore, there's something very loud in someone's background. There it goes. She literally was like, they're vegetables because we have them in a vegetable garden. And I was like, yes, but you also have strawberries growing in there. She was like, well, but those are on the outside. And I was like, no, they're not. They're in the same garden. I was very upset. Clearly, I still am. I'm a delight. Thank you.
Well, we all know now. If you didn't know before, now you know. Also, I'm going to point out...
My second book delves into the theme of fruits and vegetables much more deeply, in case anyone is as fascinated by the topics I am, which you shouldn't be.
I am excited about that. If there's more violence, yes.
No more violence, just arguing about that.
Fine, I guess I'm so excited for that. All right, and I'm going to point out someone in the chat said that they went to high school with a girl whose name was God's Gift, which, I mean, I don't know how... Like, filling out forms must be so hard. Can you put an apostrophe? Can you put the space? Like, that just makes your kid's life difficult. Anyway, next I want to talk about pop culture in your guys' books. So, Isaac, your book is sort of, I think, has a lot more references to TV shows. There's, I always forget because I'm not like a Star Trek guy, but like there's a Star Trek something next. Yeah. I forget which one, but there's that reference. There's a Gilmore Girls, High School Musical, like all these references. Kyle, I didn't think you were gonna have any, because sort of for the first eighth of the book, it was kind of like this, like, I mean, I think overall it's still like, it feels like kind of a timeless classic tale. But when I saw like Hello Kitty for the first time, or when I saw like YouTuber, I was like, oh, like we're in current things now. And then I think jazz is mentioned at the end, and not jazz the music, jazz the person. But I was sort of like surprised by that. So I would like to hear about you guys and about your decision to include those references and what specifically made you reference those things. And yeah, Kyle, do you want to go first? You look like you wanted to say something.
Sure. No, I just remember that Isaac went first last time, so it's my turn now. So the first two references you mentioned, so the Hello Kitty is just because I had a Hello Kitty water bottle that I covered with duct tape, so it was just easy to move that to Moira's bike. And then the YouTube conversation I added because my editor was like, we need a scene where they're doing some stuff. And I was like, okay. But I also I had to come up with a reason why Bug didn't have a lot of access to the internet. not just because of the information that you can find on the internet, but also because the internet is how you connect to other people and how you make friends and how you form community. And I was much more interested in exploring what isolation looked like. So I had to come up with a reason to not have Bug be super online like a kid. Like, I mean, I was pretty online at the time. I was like 12 or 13. It makes sense that a kid Bug's age, who's like 11, would be super online by then. But that sort of went against the whole like lonely isolation vibe that I was going for. Because like Bug never felt lonely because there was Uncle Roderick and Mom to hang out with. But now that Uncle Roderick is gone, that like Bug goes from being like somewhat alone to just being lonely all the time. And having that sort of like internet, having like connection to online communities would have taken away from that. And yeah, I mean, sometimes authors are encouraged to avoid pop culture references because they'll become dated very quickly, which I think is advice that has some value, but also isn't necessarily something that you need to take as like a rule to live or die by. But also like, I think it's just like, I'm not that into pop culture. Like, an embarrassing fact is that in the car the other day, a Madonna song came on and I had to muster up all my courage to be like, is this Madonna? Because I'm not sure. And it was very much a Madonna song and I did not know that. I just don't know things. I don't really care that much about most things except for books. My whole thing is books forever. And I know that's not true for other people, but like, I just didn't want to put in references that didn't feel authentic to the character I was trying to write, whose, again, emotional topography is essentially mine. So yeah. Your turn, Isaac.
Yeah, you can go. I was like, I'm going to take 1 minute to go grab my charger. But yeah, no, I can hear you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I described Spencer as a blurred black nerd, but as I was writing, like I didn't actually have that many nerdy references, and I knew I needed to kind of fill that out a bit. And something that I would watch when I was writing and revising was just a lot of Star Trek, because the episodes are long. I hope, like, I find them entertaining, but like I can actually just have them in the background and still concentrate on writing. So I was watching a lot of Star Trek, and I decided to kind of slip it in whenever it fit. With Gilmore Girls and the other one, High School Musical, that was honestly just because I was lazy, and I had the line "We're all in this together," and I just like wanted to put it in, and I needed to reference something because otherwise I was stealing. So I was like, "That's me citing my references." But something that I did have to change was at the beginning, Spencer had a Tumblr, because when I was writing, when I started writing the book, Tumblr was still a big thing. And it slowly got less and less of a big thing, and people were moving off of Tumblr. So I think I just call it social media. Spencer was going through social media, and I think for the rest of my books, that's all I'm ever going to call it. I'm not going to name a specific app, because it changes way too much. Something that I added later on, I added a few Wakanda references after I saw Wakanda or Black Panther, and part of me kind of was like, is this too much? Because I know there's the whole thing, like there are think pieces about how like the idea of Wakanda is problematic. But then I'm thinking, this is a biracial black kid in rural Ohio, one of the only biracial black kids in his school. He would latch on to something like Black Panther, and that would be significant to him as a character. So it made sense to him to reference that, because that's really, apart from when he like goes to see his family in other places that are more diverse, those are like the only black people he sees besides his dad and his like two friends or whatever, like teammates or something. So it made sense to me to have multiple references. And actually, when I was revising, I was watching. I don't know if I was watching. I think I was revising. I wasn't watching anything. And there was a moment where Micah, who's the only other black kid on the team, he scores a goal and he flosses. He does like the flossing dance. And I was doing copy edits. That's what I was doing. And the copy editor was like, "What's flossing?" and I was like, "Well, I could explain it." And also flossing like now isn't a thing. But it was the day that Chadwick Boseman died. And I just threw in a Wakanda salute. And I was like, okay, that's going to be my tribute. And so even though it might be a bit over, I might have had too many references, I still think it's important for those two black kids in a very white area to have something where they see a movie that has people that look like them. So I'm glad I kept them in.
Yeah, I think that was, I mean, my limited experience with all of it. Like that, when like reading that, it was kind of like if you didn't have it, people might be like, are they real teenagers if they're not obsessed with like Black Panther and doing them kind of silly? And then also, so you sort of with High School Musical, I think, I don't know, I think I read your book like a month ago, but this stuck out to me. I think you did. I'm gonna say I think one more time. Okay, I think. Okay, then it's gone. You did calibrate High School Musical for the character. I think you said it was his older sister.
Oh, yeah, I have older sisters. Yeah.
Yeah, so that it wasn't like him who was obsessed with it. It was kind of like, oh, that I know this from her. But yeah. All right. So pop culture. Oh yeah. No. So this is a nice segue, and I almost brought it up earlier, moved it up, but I am super curious about putting yourself in a younger person's mindset, and like I do that too. Obviously, like I right way, but like Spencer is 15. Yeah, like I kind of remember way more about being 17, 18, which is what I write, than I do about being 15. And then Bug is 11, 12 in the book. And there is this moment near the beginning of the book where Bug sort of goes to the sink and is like, he's like, oh, like it's recent that that I've been able to sort of like do the dishes properly because of, and I was like, oh, that was the moment I realized that I read everything as a 6-foot man. Like it was that moment where I'm like, I guess at one point the sink was like, you know, out of your reach. And then like there was one moment where, not one moment, but like it was a little bit after that, it wasn't. And so that's something like if I tried writing a middle grade, like the copy editor would have to be like, they cannot reach the freezer. Like you need to, like something like that would happen. So I'm wondering if you guys can talk about physically and emotionally sort of inhabiting the body and the mind of a younger person.
I think that's interesting that you said that like you can remember like being 16, 17 more. And I chose the age 15 for several reasons, but I wanted to have a character that transitioned pre-puberty, so didn't have to go through the secondary the puberty that didn't align with his gender. So I needed a younger character in order to do that. Or I needed him to be younger when he transitioned, but I also wanted him to be able to be in a romantic relationship, so he couldn't be too young. And so 15 was kind of that age. And I really remember like that. I don't actually remember 15. I remember like 13, 14, 15, and a bit of 16. But those were like really hard years in my like growing up and adolescence. So I think that's why I kind of latched onto that for this book, and was able to kind of take all of that like discomfort and all the not bad things that happened, but more of the negative emotions that occurred at that age, and kind of put it into the book. Like I didn't try to sound like a teenager because I'm not a teenager, but I think actually going back to the first question about third person, I do have some lines where I kind of poke fun both at adults and also at teenagers and kind of things that we think of when we're teens. That's actually not true, because when you're a teenager, like all of your emotions are so big and everything is so immense and immediate, and I really, that's why I like writing for young people, because it's fun to play with those emotions. So I tried to kind of focus on those kind of universal emotions that we all experience, and kind of make it kind of not blow it up, but make them bigger than they actually are. For the body, there is a line at the very end where, so Spencer's very short. I'm very short. Spencer's going to grow. I'm not going to grow. So I'm jealous of him that he gets to grow. But at the end, there's a moment where he puts his elbow on his mom's shoulder and realizes that he's almost as tall as her, or if not taller. And so I did kind of want him to show him his growth. But yeah, I guess he's the same height as I am at the beginning of the book, but ends up being taller than me. at the end, and so I didn't really have to imagine being short because I am short, so I didn't have to do too much thinking on that.
Same. I also do not have to imagine being short. It comes fairly naturally to me. Also, Aaron, when you were saying about like the scene where Bug is like saying like, "Oh, I'm tall enough to like reach into the sink now," it reminded me of, I think it was like the last school year. I don't remember when, but one of my kindergarten students. It was like the tiniest kindergarten in her class. It was like one of the tiniest kids like of her age that I've worked with. And I remember at one point she had to wash her hands, and she like sort of like crawled up on the counter and she balanced on her belly with her like belly on the edge of the sink and like to wash her hands and then pushed herself off. And I suddenly had this like visceral memory of my shirt always being wet because I had to do that because I was so small that I couldn't reach the faucet. So I had to like balance on my belly to wash my hands. And I didn't remember doing that until I saw this tiny 5-year-old do it. I was like, my shirt was always wet and that was why. But that aside, I don't know if I have a particularly good memory of what I felt like as a young person, or if working with young people for 8 years has helped me re-access those memories. It's probably a combination of the two. But it isn't hard for me to remember what it felt like to be lonely, especially because I'm still lonely a lot of the time. Like that's a normal thing to feel, and I feel it a lot. But the thing that was hard was, I don't know. I don't know why it was easy for me to access those emotions. And I wonder if it's just because I've always sort of sensed a through line of myself from like child to adult. Like I remember being a kid and having these like sudden flashes inside being like, I'm a child and I do not enjoy this. Like it is undignified. It is unpleasant. At moments it is very uncomfortable. I do not enjoy this whatsoever. So I wonder if, I think it might just be that I've always had like a sort of through line where I was like conscious of whatever developmental stage I was at in a way that felt sort of like external to experiencing it in the moment. But I continue to be short, so that was not hard to remember. And like I always had my hair tied back in a really tight braid, which I still sometimes like, I sort of miss the sensation of having something always like squeezing on the back of my head. That always felt really nice. I remember the terrible clothes that I wore before I learned how to dress myself. I don't know. I don't remember. I don't know. I don't know if I have a good memory or not because I don't know what's difficult to remember and what isn't. But it all just sort of started coming back pretty steadily.
Interesting. I wonder if I like tried to write something about me at like 11 or 12, or not me, but like a character, and tried to draw on what I remember. I remember reading a lot, so I do appreciate that Bug always has a book, like, or like spends their entire day reading, and mostly that, but other stuff. So we're gonna mix it up a little bit. I'm gonna ask you guys separate questions. So I'm not super well versed in middle grade, but so it's been a while since I've seen a prologue and an epilogue, and so Kyle, can you talk about doing that? And like how Twitter always has the same discourse over and over. At one point, it was like epilogues are, like they're always like, oh, don't do this. Like no one likes that anymore. But it's like if you do it well, nothing's dead, right? So and the line you stole from your dad, your first line, is in the prologue, and the epilogue is, I'm not going to spoil it. It's like this beautiful end note to the entire story. So can you talk about like choosing to use those?
Yeah, so the answer to the prologue is a boring one, which is that originally it was chapter 1. And at some point someone was like, that should be the prologue instead. So I just changed the words chapter 1 to prologue. And then I went through and I changed all the chapter headings so that the math made sense. So yeah, that is the answer to that. And then the epilogue I needed to have at the end because it's not really a plot moment. Like it's also like speaking of things that are dead, but aren't dead if you can do them well. The prologue, the epilogue is a dream sequence because dreams are important in this book. which are, I know they're overdone, but also the cool thing about writing for kids is that kids don't know things like that. Kids don't know the dream sequences are overdone, and kids don't know that you're not supposed to do prologues, because for kids, they haven't read that many books. So everything is new to them. What's a trope for you is new to a kid. What's a cliche for you is new to a kid, because they're relatively new to being human beings in the first place. So I didn't feel bad for having dream sequences, because kids don't know that you're not supposed to do them. So yeah, the epilogue was to sort of establish this tonal shift away from like the very like sort of like straightforward, realistic, clear prose, and into something much more dreamlike that gave you a sense of closure but not ending, I would say. I wanted the epilogue to sort of set up the rest of Bug's life rather than end the story that I just told. And I didn't know how to do that without a more like sort of dreamy, like warm, sort of vague and fuzzy situation at the end. Because like I think that one difference about middle grade as opposed to adult fiction, I think it's why it can go in either direction, is that middle grades tend to start with beginnings rather than endings, because the audience that it's intended for are still very early in their life and very little has ended for them at that point, and you want to sort of give them a sense that there's so much more to come. So that's why I ended it with the sense of beginning rather than ending.
That's beautiful. So Isaac, you have an epilogue. No, I'm kidding. Can you talk to us about writing action? Because I, again, am not a sports guy. I'm especially not a soccer guy, but I was still able to follow along. So how?
So I am also not a sports guy in terms of playing sports, but I watch a lot of soccer. And so I think I got like what you're reading is a person who doesn't play soccer's interpretation of what playing soccer is like. Something that I did was I cut out, for all the players, I cut them out of on card and put them on a magnetic whiteboard and like move them around so that I could diagram the plays. There's a scene where there's a free kick, and like everybody who read the scene at the beginning like had no idea what was happening in the free kick, and I really just wanted to be able to like take a GIF or a video and just put it in the book and be like, this is what I'm talking about. This is a free kick, but obviously I cannot yet. So having to like break down the action was actually kind of hard because there's only so much you can like say about like where the ball goes and who kicks the ball. So many words for kick, so many words for foot, so many words for ball. All the players use he, him pronouns, so you have to like figure out how to differentiate between them. But really, like, yeah, using my little whiteboard was helpful. I stole a lot of, not a lot, because there aren't that many soccer scenes, I don't think, but there are quite a few. I stole some plays from actual games that I've watched. Like, again, the free kick is one where the ball goes under the wall, and now players tend to like lie behind the wall so they can stop the ball. Penalties are always fun to write because they're stressful to watch, and that makes for kind of good writing, I think, because it's a lot of intensity. But yeah, I just kind of, my research was just watching a lot of soccer and listening as well. I actually prefer listening to it being commentated on the radio than actually watching it, because they're a lot more descriptive, because obviously you can't see the game when you're listening on the radio. So I kind of channeled my best radio presenter when I was writing the action scenes to try to make it feel like people were actually at the game. Because the thing is, I like watching soccer, but I don't like watching my team play because that's really stressful. So like, it's weird. I have a weird relationship with soccer where I love it, but also I hate it because it's painful and depressing, but also a lot of fun.
Awesome. And my last question is about title. How did you title your book? I did see that, I'm pretty sure both of you, the title is that thing where when you're reading the book and then you read it and you're like, oh, that's the title. Like, it's in the text, which is always a fun moment. But I'm wondering, after like going through like publishing stuff, I realized that sometimes to pick a title, people will go to the manuscript and look for good lines to make the title. Because like when they tried to make me change mine, that's what I was doing. So yeah, real quick about the title.
So it took me a ridiculous long time to find the title for the book. It was originally named after a Harry Styles song, which didn't actually make sense, but I still liked it. But when my agent and I went on sub, she was like, you know what? The team thinks it's great, it's ready to go, but we have to change the title because it's not descriptive enough. So they sort of threw around some ideas, which were like, they were not bad, but they weren't what I wanted for the story. And so I wanted something that could fit for soccer, but also for being trans. And I was just like Googling like soccer glossaries and just going through it. And it took me a really long time. I found passing. And I was like, wait, why didn't I think of this? Like the first thing I thought of. And so, yeah, the passing playbook, that's how it came to be.
And then the original title of my book was Live With That, which is also the last 3 words of the book, which I still like. But then apparently the team over at Dial decided that it was a little bit too negative and like it was too negative and it wasn't descriptive enough, which like I still like it, but I don't think they're wrong. Like that's fair, I guess. And so then my editor did that thing where she like pulled a bunch of different parts that she thought that she really liked, and we tried to come up with a title from that. And I'm really happy with Too Bright to See. I think it's the perfect title. I'm really glad they bullied me into changing it, even though I was grumpy about it at first. And also a thing that I didn't realize until like a little bit ago, because I'm not a visually minded person, is that on the cover, Bug is going like this because it's bright. It's too bright to see. It's on the cover, and I didn't notice that for a while. But it made me very happy.
Yeah, I'm glad you figured that out. But it works. It worked great as a title, and then like that passage that contains it is it's beautiful. So I'm glad that worked out. Maybe audience question we could do real quick. When did you know you wanted to be a writer?
I never really thought I want to be a writer. It's just a thing that I started doing and didn't stop. It's just I don't
When
know
was
if I
that?
wanted to. I don't know. I just always kind of did it. Like I liked writing in college, and then after college I was crazy and had to get all my crazy thoughts out of my brain, so I started writing then. Then I was like, oh, this is a good thing to do when I can't find someone to hang out with, and I just kept doing it.
Yeah, I found my mom moved recently, and she found a whole bunch of my old schoolwork. And so starting from like kindergarten, I was writing stories. My kindergarten report card said that my favorite thing to do was go on the computer and write stories and illustrate them. And so I just have a whole bunch of stories that I wrote from like age 5 and up. But I never really thought that I could like be a writer as a career until grad school, even though I'd been writing like since I was 5. So I think as a kid, I kind of wanted to be a writer, but I didn't know how writers happened, like how a book got published. And then I kind of pushed it aside for like practical stuff. I did quotes for that for the benefit of people who cannot see. And so, then in grad school, I just had time to write more, and I got into the business side of publishing.
Cool. And I'll answer this too. I tried writing my first book when I was 9. I didn't finish the book until I was 21, and then I had to like Google all the clearing stuff, like how to actually become a writer. But I did want to be one at 9. What is your morning ritual? Do you write in the morning a certain place? I'm assuming with a certain food or drink.
I used to only ever write at my favorite coffee shop, which is now closed, and I also live very far away from it. But now I wake up whenever I do, and I make coffee, and I sit at the one specific desk in one specific room, and I work for about 2 or 3 hours, and then my brain stops being able to do things. So then I do some other things for a while. But yeah, mornings. I love the morning.
I do not really have a routine. I kind of like crawl out of bed actually for the past like 2 weeks, I've been really good at not looking at social media while in bed. I just get up and get ready and eat breakfast, and I have a day job and do my day job. And then generally I write on the weekends. That's when I get the bulk of my writing in, because I find that after work I'm just too exhausted to do anything that requires too much brain power. So yeah, I don't really have a set routine, but I'm trying. I'm making an effort every day, but it's hard.
Yeah, I also do not have a routine. I wake up at a different time every day. Sometimes I go weeks without writing. It's all very just it's a crapshoot. All right, cool. So we did get to the end of all of the questions. I want to thank Isaac Fitzsimons and Kyle Lukoff for joining me. If you look in the chat, we do have some links to where you can buy their books from Astoria Bookshop. Astoria Bookshop is our host tonight. So you can buy their books there. You can also pre-order my book. This is the first shop talk I've done where like you can pre-order my book, which is pretty cool. So I want to thank Astoria Books. I want to thank Carter for organizing all of this. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Thank you so much. If you've come to a past shop talk to this one, I just want to thank you guys. If you would like to see previous shop talks, recorded ones, featuring the award-winning best-selling authors Kaysen Callender, Adib Khurram, Leah Johnson, Abdi Nazemian, Elsie Rosen, Arvid Ahmadi, Marco Shiro, Jason June, and Robbie Couch, you can find those on Astoria Bookshop's YouTube channel. And I love how that list just keeps growing, and it's so gay, and it's so... and then I'm going to add you guys to that list, and it's just going to get obnoxiously long. So, yeah, do you guys want to say anything else before we head out?
I would be really happy if we could edit out the part where I said that I like slapped a childhood friend, but also hopefully everyone understands that I was a child and I don't.
I think we all get it, but we can talk to Carter after.
No, thank you, Aaron. This was great. Yeah, that's very great questions.
Oh, thank you.
That too, I agree with Isaac.
That's very sweet, guys. Of course, your books deserve it, right? Like more than just some other questions that I'm sure you guys get asked a lot. But yeah, no, I was more than happy to take the time to read them and think about them. And this was, as always, a great conversation. Have a lovely week, everyone.